And as it relates to the next game, I think the obviously we want to talk about Ole Miss, and this is actually an Ole Miss team that currently sits at 3-0 in SEC. And the reason that's important is there's currently only 3 teams in the conference that sit at 3-0, and that's Alabama, Ole Miss, and Auburn. So this game will determine who at least one of those that goes to 4-0 is. So this gives us an idea as to where Alabama sits in the pecking order for the SEC. Um, Ole Miss has won a couple of pretty good games this year, right? They beat BYU, they beat Colorado State, they beat Louisville, right? Some earlier season games, and then so far in the SEC play, they have beaten Georgia, right? Which actually looks like a much better win, especially after Georgia beat Kentucky. They beat Arkansas and they beat LSU, right? So they have a couple of good wins in conference. One on the road, two at home. So it really is going to see how well Alabama is, or how well Ole Miss is prepared to play kind of the higher end part of the SEC. Because Alabama will clearly be one of the best teams that Ole Miss has played. Ole Miss has played or has lost to Purdue and Memphis this year. But I think that Alabama has a good chance to to win this game, right? Obviously, we'll talk about how I think that's going to happen here in just a second, but kind of from a wide scale looking at it, I think that Ole Miss has played a tougher schedule here recently because of the SEC, but had a pretty weak non-conference schedule outside of Memphis and their MTE, right? Memphis and their MTE was pretty good, but outside of that, they did not do a great job scheduling. A lot of 200, 300 level Ken Palm opponents, which is what we saw out of Oklahoma, and we saw how that ended up happening. I do think, however, that Ole Miss has, had a pretty good start to their conference slate, and I think that's going to get them off on the right foot. And I think that Chris Beard's obviously a really good coach. So when you're looking at Ole Miss, I think the thing that you have to look at is, can they just string together some wins, right? They've already started with 3 in conference. But if they can string together wins, that's what's going to help them, be able to keep competing near the top of the SEC. Because I think Ole Miss is somebody that was picked near the bottom of the SEC. However, Chris Beard is as good of good enough of a coach, and Ole Miss has a decent enough roster that they could definitely scare some of the teams at the top. And so Alabama's going to have to play their game, right? So first and foremost, what does Ole Miss do really well? They're a slightly better defensive team than offensive team. That's a Chris Beard team. They do a great job turning you over, as well as not turning the ball over themselves. And they do a great job blocking shots and getting steals, right? So they're a big blocks, steals, turnovers team on defense. And they take care of the ball a lot on offense, right? I wouldn't call them super efficient from a shooting standpoint, but they do a good job making sure that they don't cause the mistakes that get rid of the basketball. So I do think this is going to be a fairly clean game from a turnover perspective. I think this is going to be a fairly clean game. I think that Alabama is going to have to do a good job turning over not turning over the basketball, but I do think that with the way Ole Miss plays, I think this can end up being a game in which there gets to be some flow, because I think that Ole Miss is going to try to get some steals and blocks and such. But I think that because of how they don't turn over the ball and how they like to play, I think that there can be some flow as it relates to this game. A few of the games in which Ole Miss has played this year have been very much the pace was determined by how both teams were playing. And so because of that, I do think that Alabama can get the pace of this game up a little bit. And that obviously goes into Alabama's favor as long as Alabama can control the basketball and not turn it over, right? Alabama had some problems with turnovers earlier in the in the preseason and in non-conference play. But the question is, can they not turn the ball over keep turning the ball over, because that definitely can cause us some issues. So that's really the question when you're looking at this game. Ole Miss has some shooters, Sean Padula and Jalen Murray, both really, really good shooters. Jalen Murray obviously having been there last year, Padula the transfer from Virginia Tech. But both of them shooting over 40% on high attempts, right? Padula at 90 attempts this year. Murray has 82 so far this season. So these guys have very high attempts. So this isn't a situation where, this team is afraid to shoot the three. They're obviously going to want to shoot the three. They are one of the higher three-point shooting teams in the country from an attempt standpoint. They also are somebody that give up a lot of threes, right? When you're looking at the percentages that they give up about 45% of opponent shots to be from three, right? That's obviously something that plays very much into how Alabama likes to play basketball. So I do think that this is another situation where, as long as Alabama has the right guys taking the right shots, the shots will be there to be had, right? Similar to this A&M game that we just played. Obviously, it's going to be slightly different because of how the defense is going to be played, but it's a situation where the shots are going to be able to be had as long as you have the right guy taking them, right? So this is, again, the situation where the reason I mentioned about Chris Youngblood not passing up shots, this is a game where you don't need him passing up shots. You don't need Aiden Holloway passing up shots. You obviously never need Mark Sears passing up shots. And that's really, really important when you look at games like this, because their ability to make shots and to not pass them up, because Ole Miss is a good enough defensive team that they may not give you a ton of attempts, right? It's like if you pass up the one open look you get, they're a good enough defense where they can scramble enough to you don't get another open attempt for the rest of the shot clock, right? So you really have to take the shot when you're given it. And I do think that's going to be a really important note for this game, is to play in your flow of the offense and take the shot when you're given it. The other place that I think Alabama can have a lot of success in this game is rebounding, right? Alabama showed in the A&M game by out-rebounding A&M that they can be a very elite rebounding team, right? A very elite rebounding team from an offensive and defensive standpoint. They just have to put their mind to it and compete. So I do think that Alabama is going to be a better rebounding team than Ole Miss. Ole Miss does not have the elite rebounders outside of Malik Dia, who's an elite defensive rebounder, but they don't have the rebounders that A&M has. So I think that this is going to be a easier rebounding competition, but Alabama obviously still has to compete, right? Alabama still has to compete on the glass. Alabama still has to put in the effort. And I think that Alabama can win the rebounding battle. And obviously, if you can win the rebounding battle, that gives you a leg up into winning the game. Because obviously, the easiest threes are off of offensive rebounds. Alabama's speed can happen better when you get the defensive rebound. We just get into the flow of our offense more. And I think that overall, everything comes easier when you're winning the glass. So if I had to guess, I do think this is going to be a slightly higher possession game. I would probably think 74, 75 possessions maybe. I do think that Alabama wins this game. I think this gets up into the 90s as well. I'm going to say this game probably gets up into the 92-81, 92-78 type possession range. Points range. I do think that Alabama can win this game. I think that because this is at home, I think that Alabama will be kind of fired up to be back in Coleman for the first time in quite a while, actually. Alabama having not played at home since before the New Year's and not played a big game at home since, Creighton. So I think this is going to be a really big game that a lot of people are going to be excited for. Obviously, students are back in town, so I think this is going to be one that a lot of people are going to be ready for. And I do think that Alabama wins this game and gets off to the 4-0 start in SEC play. So that's my thoughts as it relates to this game. Like I said, I'm going to go 91-78 as for a final. I do think that, like I said, I do think that Alabama wins. I think that Alabama gets off to a 4-0 start in SEC play, and I think that we move on to the next one. So that's my thoughts as it relates to this game. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.